Welcome back, everyone. So make sure you are inside of the new GraphQL version of the application. Make sure all of the libraries are installed. And to begin, in order to start working with GraphQL, we need to first, as you might suspect, wrap the application in some kind of GraphQL provider. Now, instead of a GraphQL provider, it's actually going to be an Apollo provider. So in order to get started with that, we need to import in a few things. The first is going to be this Apollo client. Now, Apollo client is going to be the thing that registers the actual GraphQL server that you're trying to hit. So we need the Apollo client. The next thing we need is something known as in-memory cache. And we also need the Apollo provider. So this, of course, being the provider that you wrap around your application. To begin with, the first thing we need to do is initialize the client. So we'll say const client is equal to a new Apollo client. And we're going to pass into this Apollo client a single parameter, which is going to be an object. The object is going to have URI as a key, where you will point to the URL of the server. Now, the URL of the server is going to be our GraphQL playground, which is also our server's entry point. They serve double duty. So this, you can just come back to the actual URL, copy it, and then paste it in. As for the actual cache, this is the second key value. So remember, we were looking at that in-memory cache, which we imported. We're going to say new in-memory cache. And what caching does is exactly as you might expect with any type of caching. When you make a request with GraphQL, that request comes back and GraphQL will actually cache that value as well. So if you make that request again, if nothing's changed, GraphQL will just give you the cached value. And this is where it's really handy because essentially there is a local copy of the data you have asked for. So that's the big thing with Apollo that you can do. So once we have set up this client, what we want to do now is we want to wrap the highest part of our application inside of this Apollo provider. Now we're going to wrap all of our code inside of our new Apollo provider, and we're going to pass to it client, where the client is going to go to this new Apollo client that we created. And now we're able to utilize GraphQL inside of our application. So the first place to start is I'm going to work with our categories context, because if you remember, that's where we're actually fetching our data. So if you open up the categories context, instead of actually making this request to Firebase, we now have our own separate server that is hosting our data. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly get rid of this code so that we have a better idea of what's going on. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to import in two different things from the Apollo client. I want to import in GQL. GQL is what allows us to write those same query signatures that we have been doing inside of the playground. The next thing I want is use query, because use query is how we'll actually be able to utilize the actual shape that we made and make a request. So exactly as it looks like, you use query when you want to make a query. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define that shape of the object. So I'm going to say const collections, and I can say this in capitals like this, is equal to GQL. And then we pass it a string interpolation. So the backticks, remember to use backticks, not single quotes or double quotes. Inside of here, I'm going to say query collections, or I can actually call it get collections if I want to be more explicit. And what I'm going to say inside of this query is that, okay, there's collections, which is the name of the query, and then there's the fields. So here we can come to the playground and we can just copy this over. Like so. And now this represents our collections query. You don't even need this title. It's more so for yourself if you want to read it. but I'm just going to get rid of it just so that our signature matches what we've already currently seen inside of our GraphQL playground. But this now represents the tag. You'll notice it looks pretty much the exact same as what we had inside of our previous playground. So here, once I have this all set up, what I'm also going to do, other than fixing these indents so that they're more in line with what I want to see, is now I am going to actually use this inside of the provider. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call that use query hook that we got back. And what it returns back to us, I'm going to discuss. But first, I'm going to pass this collections query that we just made into use query. So again, remember, you want to make a GraphQL query inside of the shape that you want. You just pass it using the GQL tag with this backtick string, and then you literally just paste it exactly as you see. Here, inside of calling this use query, this will give us back three things. It'll give us back a Boolean telling us if this is being loaded. Just like we did with our Redux Saga and Redux Thunk videos where we had some kind of loading state, use query also gives us a loading state. It gives us also an error in case you have an error get thrown, and you also get back the data. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console log out the data so we can see what we're working with. So if we save this, and let's go back to our terminal and make sure that we start our server. And now if we come to our application and we restart, we should see the request get made to GraphQL. And there we see it. We see that we have first initially undefined when the query first goes out. So when we initialize our application, of course, there is no data because the query is still being created. Then once it's done, you'll notice that we get back the data and it matches the shape what was in our playground. So we see our collections, and inside of our collections, we have the array with all of the values that we have asked for. So this is pretty much what we need to work with GraphQL. This is our data. We just have to get used to this structure when it comes to destructuring it off inside of our application. Now, in order for us to double check a couple things, let me just also make sure that I console log the loading state. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log out loading as a string points to the loading value. And similarly, data is the data. So now we get to see all the different states as this hook works. First, we see we initialize loading is true, data is undefined, then loading is false, and data is equal to the collections. So very intuitive. We understand how it works. On mount, of course, default state of loading is going to be true because the query is being made. Data is undefined because we have no data. Loading is false because we've gotten back our data, and of course, then we see our data object. So there we go. Now that we have our data, let's start modifying our context so that we can now use what we're getting back. We'll do that in the next video together.